It is 2:37, so let's call the ADF Appeals Committee to order. This is day 2. Melissa, can you again just take note of the attendance, and then we'll just get going. I think we should probably have another call to the public today, but staff has not received any request to speak forms, so we'll just move into where we left off yesterday, which is on the expedited appeals, which is agenda item number 3. So, I'm sorry, you're right, Member Burton, agenda item number 4. And our computers are running a little bit slow today, so just be aware. So, as a reminder, these are the appeals. The ones that we heard yesterday are the folks who filed a non-expedited appeal, and they had 15 minutes. These appeals are those who filed an expedited appeal, which is document only. There are about 30 of these. And then the final agenda item that we'll be discussing today are the dismissals, and there's 29 of those, so it's about split evenly. When I say the dismissals, those are what staff is recommending as dismissals. When we get to that agenda item, the committee can, pull some out if they want to discuss some. It still has all 3 options with those, but we wanted to try to break it up a little bit to make it easier for the committee. And so actually to that end, staff also broke up these expedited appeals for this agenda item into this list. And that was the list from yesterday. To try to help guide some of our discussions, and staff thought maybe this would be a good way to break up the appeals and discussions today. We would sort of maybe chunk out each of these and go, one school at a time within these categories. Is just a way to think about it. So unless the committee has any questions, I think maybe we'll just start going into it. Okay, so this first category of schools, Clarkdale Jerome, Mountain View Prep, Cottonwood Middle, and Mingus Union High School. These are appeals that are related to specifically some 8th grade students, or I think other students that were missing in the calculations. So these were incorrect data, citations. Mingus Union did have another reason for appeal in there, and I'll get into them when we talk about them. But the other 3 schools were incorrect data, saying that they had some missing students, and they were all related to Mingus Union in one way or the other. I think what it comes down to with these schools is that ADE, as they did with all these other appeals citing incorrect data, ran through and figured, which of these would impact the letter grade and which would not. And Clarkdale Jerome was one that would impact their letter grade. And I'm going through the spreadsheet right now. Mountain View Prep was one that was also one that would impact the letter grade. And so was Cottonwood Middle. Mingus Union High School, on the other hand, that change would not impact their letter grade. And just as some additional information for what Mingus Union also cited some technology issues. After reviewing Mingus Union's appeal based on the technology issues, because if the data side did not impact their letter grade, that leaves the technology issues. Board staff did talk to the department's assessment team and asked some additional questions about what was happening with Mingus Union's technology problems. And staff feels like the issues that were cited with Mingus Union in terms of their technology issues would not fit into the same categories as some of those other schools that we'll be discussing with technology problems, and therefore wouldn't warrant an approval, at least from a staff recommendations.
It would not?
It would not, correct. So I think if we're looking at the first bullet point in those 4 schools, schools number 1, 2, and 3, the incorrect data would impact their letter grade. Oh, I'm sorry.
There's a lot in there, so it's hard to read the notes, but Cottonwood would not be.
I'm sorry.
That's the notes I have.
Yeah, sorry. No, it's only Clarkdale.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Oh, sorry, do I need that?
Yeah. So, Catcher, if I could.
How did I miss that?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Could we go maybe one at a time on these? I think it would, the overview is very helpful, so I do appreciate that, but maybe take each one, because I do have a question, I believe, about Mountain View, and then Cottonwood. Of course, the question is, what would happen, because the letter grade does not change, so I'm not sure then if the data is simply changing or if we're acknowledging it, because I think in prior, if the data didn't change, did it end up being a dismissal?
Yeah, so member K, definitely we'll take them one at a time.
Okay.
Part of the reason that these schools are within this category and not within the next agenda item is that we were just waiting for the data to be run.
Right.
And so
Okay.
we couldn't make a recommendation or fit them into a category until ADE could make a determination.
I
So
see.
until we could come to that point, we had to put it into this bucket because we
Okay.
weren't sure. But yes, so Clarkdale Elementary, Clarkdale Jerome Elementary, I'm sorry. So they did list certain students with their SACE IDs who they said were missing. They were all 8th grade students, and they did take those assessments at Mingus High School. And they said that after review of their data, they didn't receive those points, and that would have moved them up to an A, and they had previously been at B.
5 students, right?
Yes, 5 students. And I don't know if Alan from the department has anything else to add.
We can just explain what happened. Mingus just didn't enroll those kids when they should have. So in order for both schools to get credit, they need to be enrolled at both places. Or should I say members of the board? Sorry, this is my first time addressing you all. Yeah, so Mingus Union just didn't enroll those kids, which is why they didn't get picked up for either Mingus Union or the elementary schools. And so once that was corrected, they were able to be brought in for Mingus Union and for the elementary schools. And then we think are going to communicate with in the grader to remind schools that you need to enroll them if they're taking classes at your school.
Okay.
So they basically had the students there in class, not enrolled. How that would work, I don't fully know, because I think they need an enrollment for other things. But that was the problem, and so just explaining what happened, that we identified it and got it fixed, and we'll communicate with the field so that doesn't happen again, or try not to happen again.
So, and it affected their grades and
For 2 of the 4, yeah. For Clarkdale and Mountain View, it did impact their grade. And Cottonwood and Mingus Union, it did not. So I think we're talking
Clarkdale
Clarkdale right
and
now. So
Mountain
yes,
View.
it did impact Clarkdale's.
So should we vote on Clarkdale
and Mountain View.
and Mountain View, or one?
Members, unless you wanted additional information on Mountain View or Cottonwood,
Very similar situations, yes. And I thank you for communicating with the field. I mean, these things happen, but co-enrollment is common. We certainly don't want to penalize or provide any disincentives for an 8th grader to take a high school class. So,
Absolutely.
So, but it would be Clarkdale and Mountain View where we would recommend
no, approval.
approval for that one. And then, what were the other?
and members Clarkdale Jerome Elementary and Mountain View Preparatory, it would be appropriate for a recommendation for approval
Right. And
because
then-
it would impact their letter
Letter
grade.
grade.
And then for Cottonwood Middle School, it would be appropriate for a recommendation to dismiss because it does not impact their letter grade.
Okay.
Okay. Would you like me to make that motion?
Or go right ahead.
Okay, so we'll do all 4 of these in one motion, or do we need one for each?
Just do the 3, and then we'll take Mingus Union.
Yes, the 3.
Mingus Union will be separate. Okay.
Yeah.
So for Clarkdale and Mountain View, I would like to move that we recommend approval based on the data. And
We'll just do. How about we just do that motion? We'll get a second, and then we'll do number
That's
3.
good.
Sorry. Okay.
That's
So
why I
we.
was second guessing myself.
I know that's all right. That's all right. So we have a motion for the committee to recommend approval for Clarkdale Jerome L and Mountain View Prep. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Member Burton, and all those in favor say aye. Okay, so that motion passes. So the committee recommended approval for schools 1 and 2. So Cottonwood Middle School, it would be appropriate for a recommendation for dismissal.
That one doesn't.
So it doesn't impact, is that correct?
Yes, it
And
does.
Correct.
to be consistent with our other
I guess we can dismiss it.
recommendations, would it be appropriate then, in this case, to dismiss?
Member Burton, yes, because, and I,
Because it doesn't impact the letter grade.
because it does not impact the letter grade. And again, this is not that, I think maybe dismissal is too harsh a word. That's not that the school
It's out of the
can't,
scope.
yeah, and it's
what?
not that schools can't appeal based on incorrect data, because they can. It's just that if it doesn't impact the letter grade, then there's nothing that the committee can really do beyond that. So
I
yes,
agree.
it,
Dismissal sounds harsh because it, yeah.
it makes it, yeah,
But, so,
we'll work on the nomenclature.
thank you. So I would move to recommend dismissal of Cottonwood Middle School. Dismiss the appeal.
Okay.
Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion passes. So now we're on to Mingus Union High School, number 4 for this one. And Member K, did you have something?
I do. Just in terms of the schools, and I know I brought it up yesterday. I'm not sure how clear I was, though, in my request. Will there be, I do think having accurate data is really important for the schools. So after, whether or not it impacts their letter grade, so can we have either a follow-up discussion or some sort of report in terms of what will happen? Is there a point in time where their data will be updated so that when we're comparing it to future years, it's accurate? So that's my request, that we just have a future discussion about that so we understand whether it's changed or not changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Member K. I made a note of that.
Okay.
So members with Mingus Union High School, as I mentioned earlier, they had a 2-part appeal. The first part was a technology failure that resulted in what they say are AZ scores to be far lower than anticipated. And then they also had what they're saying is those 8th grade algebra students, and that they were not enrolled correctly, and there were 42 of them, and that data is missing from their school. So as to that, we'll sort of split these up maybe. As to the data missing part, again, this is something that the department took a look at in connection with those 3 other feeder schools. And based on the notes, the inclusion of that data would not impact their letter grade. So I don't know if there's anything different with Mingus Union as to the other schools that the department wants to touch on, but I think that captures it.
So that was 42 students, right? That's what I have in my notes.
Member Broussard, they cited 42 students who took the AZ Merit Algebra 1 assessment, and their data is missing from their school calculation.
And putting those 42 students in there did not affect their grade?
Yeah, how many students attend that high school?
Well, these are 8th graders, though.
I know, getting
Oh,
credit
yeah.
for the high school. I mean, how many attend? Yeah, Mingus High School. I was surprised it didn't affect their letter grade.
It's probably just based on
Okay.
their scores, Yes, some that.
Oh, okay.
So the scores don't impact their letter grade. And then they cite this technology issue. For me, they did not provide
Member
enough
K, if you could talk into the
documentation.
microphone.
I'm sorry, for me, they did not provide enough documentation to substantiate the technology issue.
Right.
So based on that, I would move to deny the appeal for Mingus Union.
I'll second that.
So I guess my question then is, here it says on the first day of testing, our technology infrastructure failed and students were unable to connect to the AZ Merit portal. Many attempts were made to correct the situation, limiting IP addresses. It sounds like they and it says that they were unable to fully recover. Is your question just based on how many students that affected?
It's not simply how many students that affected. When I looked at some of the other appeals, to me it seemed that the evidence that was provided clearly demonstrated the technology issue and that it was outside of the school's control.
Right, like they had emails,
remedying,
contact
yes.
with their IT
The department.
techs, amongst other teachers who were, affected by it. I agree.
I feel like they went really far they ran new fiber, updated the servers, substantially increased the number of IP addresses available. So it sounds like...
But that's what they're doing to correct it.
Right, so it sounds like it was a pretty big problem. It was a total infrastructure problem.
Oh, I agree. It's just...
And they just couldn't anticipate it. Well, okay. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, so there's a motion by Member Kay and a second by Member Burton
Well, I'm going to withdraw my second because there wasn't documentation. I mean, I don't have it with me, but I can look it up. But I'm looking at it. Similar to other cases that we have approved.
So, members, maybe I'll just provide some additional information or light as to some things that board staff learned since this appeal was submitted.
Okay.
Specifically that Mingus Union took steps that were not recommended when it came to administering AZ Merit Online and computer-based testing. That was outside the recommendations that the state offers for computer-based testing. Additionally, when Mingus Union had apparently some of these technology issues, my understanding is that there's recommendations that if you do encounter technology issues in the computer-based testing, that you contact the department to try to troubleshoot those. My understanding is that Mingus Union only contacted ADE for 2 students during the window to try to troubleshoot those. And for those factors, when we consider the rubric for, when to approve an appeal or recommend approving, is this grounds for an appeal? Probably technology issues we generally consider as grounds for an appeal. Did the school take steps to mitigate its impact? I think there's some documentation in there about communications within the district, but one of the biggest ways to mitigate that is to try to contact the department who has tiered interventions that can go all the way up to the vendor. That did not occur. And then when we consider the fact that potentially the district, at least from the information that we have, took steps to frankly put themselves in a compromising position in terms of how to administer that computer-based testing, I think those are sort of the factors that led up to staff thinking that this would not fall within something that would be approvable under the appeals process.
Thank you for that information. So I do second the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion from Member Kay and a second from Member Burton to deny Mingus Union High School's appeal. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed?
Nay.
And the motion passes 2-1. So that's the first group from those 8th grade students in connection with Mingus Union. Then we have, sorry, let me make sure I make a note for you. So then we have inaccurate CCRI data. So the 8 schools listed here essentially cite that the CCRI data that they submitted was incorrect. Now there's one school that actually is in the dismissal, at least one school that's in the dismissal bucket from staff that's not here. And they cited CCRI, but they cited that they did not get the bonus point calculation, that they didn't receive the bonus point when in fact they did. So that we felt was more of a under the dismissal than the denial. So that's just something I want to be aware of, you to be aware of when we go there. Okay. So when it comes to CCRI, these all really fall under that incorrect data category. And the committee should still consider all those things that we did before, in terms of taking steps to mitigate the event and all of that. One thing that the committee also wants to take a close look at when we look at each of these also is that did the school either submit incorrect CCRI data at the time of the deadline, or is the school saying that they got additional information after the deadline, and so that additional data should be included? I think those are probably two distinct differences in that the second, if it's additional data that comes in after the deadline, that would seem to indicate that the board should reopen the CCRI window for the entire state, because everybody probably received additional data in July and August about students meeting some of those CCRI indicators and points. We feel that is probably different than incorrectly submitting that large spreadsheet at the beginning in June or July. When was the deadline?
We don't get a spreadsheet.
Right.
We get a file.
Right.
They have two submission times.
Right. And that's another good reminder, is that the spreadsheets are not submitted to the state, just the total points are. So that's when it becomes a little more tricky in terms of verifying some of that information. And that goes for the entire state, not just these schools. But they did have there were two windows. There was one open in the fall, and then there was one, the initial deadline was in the summer. And the fall one was brief, I think a few days. But there were two windows. And I think some of that was included in that documentation that we submitted initially. So I think for this one, maybe if you want to go one by one again, because they are, pretty unique in and of themselves. So we'll start with the top of the list, which is amphitheater. So Amphi had a two-part on theirs. They had graduation rate and CCRI. Again, some of these don't always cleanly fall into these four categories, but tried to make it to make sense. So Amphi, with their two-part, had the graduation rate, which my understanding based on the department is that the graduation rate in and of itself would not change their letter grade. Alan's nodding, so I feel better. And so then we have the CCRI portion.
So you're saying their grad rate would increase enough that they would gain, or would not?
Member Burton, it would not be enough. It would take the combination of the grad rate increase and the CCRI points to increase their letter grade.
Okay.
And then, members, if we look at the CCRI, understanding that they need both the graduation rate change and the CCRI change in order to impact their letter grade, the supporting documentation states in that first sentence that the CCRI submitted for Amphi is missing data that was not available before the summer deadline. Again, something that I think most schools, if not every school, could probably say that there was data that was not available to them before that deadline. And if it was something that the board would like to accept, that would have to be something, maybe a broader policy.
I mean, you'd open the door to lots of schools saying that. So.
Member Burton, I'm having a hard time hearing you. So.
Okay. No, I was just questioning and getting nods that if we went that route, it would open the door to everybody, other schools that may fall in that or come with that same request.
Yes, to me, this is similar to the definition of FAE or the timeline for FAE. At some point, you need to have a deadline.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't available prior to, then I don't think that it should be included. Because as Ketra has pointed out, we've all pointed out, it's that probably every school in the state would be impacted by that. My next question, though, on the grad rate, do we know if they filed a 915? Said that, and that's where I struggled in general in this area where there's incorrect data. Is the school, in fact, following up with a 915? And do we wait for that? Do we not? We give them the benefit of the doubt, but then how will we know if that work was done? Because in a few cases, it's a large number of students that would need to be corrected in order for this move to occur, and this is one of those cases.
Member Kay, this is something that Deputy Director Baden and I discussed yesterday, and I think with the recommendation of this committee and however the board decides to vote on those recommendations at the December 17th State Board of Education meeting, the State Board of Education would almost have to put a condition on any approvals that that schools would have to submit that 915, because if they do not submit that 915, then their data is never corrected within the system. So that means year after year they would be appealing the same data, right? So by ensuring that they submit the 915 and saying, if you do not submit this 915, next year we will not look at an appeal for the same data in which we told you that you needed to change.
I'm glad to hear that. I was thinking a conditional as well, but I didn't want to drag out the
approve
appeal.
based on the submission of a 915 and.
Oh, can we do that?
Member Broussard, and unless I'm completely wrong, because Alan got up to ask Wendy, so maybe we're wrong. But Member Broussard and Member Burton, when you do those types of conditional things, it's really hard for board staff to keep track of that, and so it's just cleaner. If you put it on as going forward, you will have to fill out a 915 to change your data for the 18-19 school year, right? Especially when you're looking at grad rate and you look at the different year after year, they would have to make sure their data is clean, and they have the opportunity in the summer to do so. So one of the other things that we have discussed with the department staff and the ATAC is to put in the
attestation
forms. I cannot say that word. And so that they have those forms that the superintendent of that school district or the data person signs off in the summer to ensure that their data has been looked at by the correct individual. It's been updated. Just more documentation so that we know that schools are looking at this data when they should be.
And they're fixing it within their systems.
Correct. Yeah. So that going forward, Member Burton, they would not need to fill out a 915 after that window has closed through school finance.
Great.
Can I add something? 915s also have to be approved by school finance, so it's not only that they submitted, that the school provides proof that they submit them, but that if they submitted 55, that all 55 or how many ever are submitted or approved. Because if it's conditional on, you need all 27 or whatever of these students to get these points, and 20 of them are approved and 7 are not.
As part of that approval process, then verification
from
that the data, that what they submit is correct.
Yeah, that would just create an additional layer of having to go through and verify after the fact, after they submitted, and school finance has approved.
I just meant part of the school finance. Is it part of their process for approval? Is it verifying the information?
I don't actually know.
Oh, okay.
I'm new, so still learning.
Members, thank you for letting me speak today. We're going to defer that to school finance. That is a process that they oversee and that they take care of. I'd be more than happy to reach out to them for details on that question, but I don't want to venture and give their answer.
Yeah,
I would like you to. I would like you to, because I do think moving forward, that's a good policy that Alicia suggested, and so I would like to. We'll hear from them,
or not just blindly.
Thank you. Yes, that's my concern. There's a few, they're double digits that all would need to be approved.
Okay,
so based on again the data that was received after that would impact the CCRI, I would move to deny the appeal for Amphitheater High School.
Is that based on the fact that it wouldn't change the letter grade?
That it wouldn't change the letter grade. Thank you.
I can second that.
Motion by Member Kay and a second by Member Broussard to deny Amphitheater High School's appeal, recommend denying Amphitheater High School's appeal. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. And the motion passes unanimously. So now we're going to move on to Antelope Union high school. Antelope Union is, again, under the CCRI category, but they did have 3 factors at least that were cited. One was the testing window's interaction with the timing of the county fair. One was the CCRI calculation. And I don't know if there was another one. Those were at least 2. Well, they have 4.
The beam speed technology to deliver internet.
Right.
Is that the one?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And members, again, deferring to the department on the data side of this, but in terms of the CCRI portion of the appeal, it could move up their letter grade if that information was accurate. And then, of course, we have the other factors that the committee may or may not consider. But I think the reason that staff put this into the CCRI bucket is that ADE determined that the incorrect CCRI information would move up their letter grade, and consistent with how else the committee had been or would be recommending, that would be consistent in and of itself, notwithstanding the technology or county fair issues or the alternative school issue. And just for the record, members, for the alternative school issue, the state, we don't have a record of that alternative school. And I think we would need some additional information before making any sort of determinations on that area.
So my question for the CCRI points and schools where we're not needing a 915, but the schools are self-reporting, is there any plan for follow-up, or what are our options to verify the accuracy?
Yeah, member case. So that's a good question. That's something that we have discussed at the staff level. As the department pointed out earlier, those spreadsheets are not actually physically submitted to the state. It's just the point totals. But something that we have talked about, in addition to those that require 15915s, is an affidavit or an attestation of some sort, asking the school and to check their data moving forward in the available time windows and to submit their CCRI when they should in the available windows, and also acknowledging that they did not take those steps in this past year. Again, none of those are really punitive. It's just trying to make sure that they understand. Something else that we've talked about as a possibility that maybe the board wants to consider and that this committee could, voice at a board meeting, is there was and I don't want Wendy I feel like maybe she's going to stare holes in the back of my head if I go too far in this, but there was a CCRI audit that the department was good enough to conduct. Now, it was really high level, and it was limited to a small number of schools, and that was for 16-17. We have talked about potentially including the schools that the committee recommends for approval here that were related to CCRI and including them into the CCRI audit bucket. Again, it would be high level. They're not going into the school. They're not verifying that information, but it's ensuring that they are documenting it appropriately and having some of the processes in place. And that audit is not punitive. It's not retroactively changing letter grades. It's not doing any other punitive actions. It's simply trying to make sure that they're aware and they're following the steps. So those are the things that staff has as potential solutions to that concern exactly, but certainly open if there's other ideas to consider, because at the end of the day, statutorily, the schools are still permitted to appeal based on incorrect data, and this is one of those things. So I think this is a good way to try to put in some guardrails and checks to make sure that the data is still sound as best as we can.
Okay. I like the suggestion. I don't have another one at this point, but I will certainly give it some thought. I just think it's important, and maybe, for future appeals, obviously what we wouldn't want to see is schools to repeatedly appeal their CCRI. We want to see improvement with their process so that their data is accurate.
Yeah.
So I will move to recommend approval based on the technology issues that they had creating an adverse testing condition. And no second.
I would second adding to that the CCRI.
That sounds good.
Member Broussard, would you be okay with recommending approval for Antelope Union High School based on the testing issues and the CCRI? The technology issues and the CCRI calculation.
They're not contesting data that was received after the fact.
Okay.
They're contesting that
The data
that
is
they
submitted
inaccurate.
was-
They submitted it on time.
Yes.
Okay. Then, yeah, I would amend.
Okay. So we have a motion from Member Broussard and a second by Member Kay to recommend approving Antelope Union High School based on the technology issues and the CCRI. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
I don't think I did. I think
The third school on this list is Canyon del Oro, or CDO. CDO had a similar two-part appeal as Amphitheater High School in that it had a graduation rate appeal and an incorrect CCRI appeal.
Is that on the last page?
On the CCRI appeal, CDO does indicate that, just like Amphitheater High School, and again, these are from the same district in Amphi, that CDO was missing data that was not available before the summer deadline, specifically data related to students who completed CCRI indicators over the summer. In terms of the graduation rate calculation, I believe the department determined that
5 points.
that would increase their letter grade.
0.26.
Oh.
So it would increase their letter grade. This would increase their letter grade for if it's just grad rate and not CCRI.
Member Burton, that's correct. And so, again, remember yesterday when I said that each of these appeals is unique. I mean, we strive for consistencies, but each is unique in that previous appeal, the grad rate in and of itself would not raise their letter grade. This one, the grad rate in and of itself would raise their letter grade. So the CCRI, even with that additional data submitted over the summer, which it seems like the committee said that's not enough, they still have the graduation rate, which would raise them.
Mm-hmm. The previous one also had technology issues. Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah. But I don't want to. Should I go? You guys ready for me? Okay,
Sure.
so then I would move to approve the recommendation, or move to recommend the approval of the letter grade change for Canyon del Oro for incorrect data.
I second.
Do you need it more specific than that?
Member Broussard made a motion and seconded by Member Kay, and that's just incorrect data based on the graduation rate.
Graduation rate.
Okay. And all those in favor?
To approve the appeal.
Yeah.
Okay, are we all, know where we're going? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Number 4 is Gateway Early College High School. Gateway is a little bit different in that part of what they're citing is using the older version, last year's version of the CCRI spreadsheet. They also cite some students that completed the class that would qualify them for some points in late July, and therefore they think that that data should be included.
Just do it at the end of June.
Can someone explain to me the old spreadsheet versus the new spreadsheet, what the difference is, and how that would affect their grade?
Member Burton, I don't know if Wendy's going to look or to speak. I don't really think that I think we might have made some tweaks to the bonus points, right? And maybe
I remember most of the data points themselves, the individual where you do the student work remain the same. Mm-hmm. There were some things that happened at the top, but I can go and look more directly and see if I can find that if you'd like me to before the end of the day, or report back to you.
Oh,
there wasn't a lot of changes.
Back. Yeah,
I think she was just wanting to know how the difference in those spreadsheets could affect the letter grade.
That's correct.
Point total. Mm-hmm. Yes.
The point total.
I'll report back to you.
Okay.
Most of it did not change.
Okay. So nothing.
Unless you remember something I don't.
Member Burton, members of the committee, none of the weighting changed within the different indicators within the CCRI rubric. Nothing has changed since that was first developed by the board and voted upon by the board.
The bonus points.
The bonus points are the only ones that came after the fact, and that was 2 points.
To make sure they were calculated outside and not within.
Okay. Now remember, the Department of Education does not collect the CCRI rubric spreadsheet from the school. They just get the number from the school.
Okay. So we wouldn't have known that they used the incorrect spreadsheet had they not put that in their appeal. Okay.
And the department's recommending denial of this because it was submitted after the deadline. Is that correct?
Just the department isn't making any recommendations on any of the appeals, but I don't want to put them in that spot.
I'm sorry. I misspoke.
Yeah, well, and so this one's tough in that if you notice, if we take out that the CCRI, they were using the wrong spreadsheet, and we're not really sure if that had an impact. But they cite 2 students who were listed, and they think those 2 students completed those classes in July and that they should be included. They don't give dates. Well, as of July 12, and the CCRI window over the summer closed on July 13th, and in late July, for those 2 students, they got confirmation that they completed. So that would sort of fall into it's after the deadline additional information. And then with number 2, again, we have 4 students whose transcripts were not issued and reported to the high school, and that was not available by the July 12 deadline. Okay. So I think even if we take out the uncertain impact of using the old spreadsheet with the new spreadsheet, all of those 6 students that they're reporting, it sounds like is information that they got after the July deadline.
So based on that, I would recommend that we deny the appeal for Gateway Early College High School.
I second, but can I just add a comment or more a question? And so some of this data could it just be added to their next year's numbers?
Seniors. Yeah, Member Broussard, no, the CCR calculation is only seniors.
Okay. So any seniors that complete anything over the summer are not captured?
If it's after the July
Yeah.
13th deadline, and that deadline coincides with the school finance deadline for correcting
Yeah.
data.
I understand why.
Okay.
And so, Member Broussard, members of the committee, a side note that I also want to bring up that is a little bit different in school year 17-18 compared to 16-17 when the CCR rubric was brand new and whatnot. In 17-18, as Deputy Director Baden talked about earlier, the department did look at some CCRI scores and determined that there were some errors that schools were making, and they reopened the CCRI window for all schools in Arizona for 3 days in the fall, which the dates were in September.
I do believe it was September.
September. And so that communication was sent out to all schools on all the listservs through the grader, that any school could go in and update their data within the CCRI rubric prior to the release of letter grades. And the grader was very specific in the areas that the department looked at and did the audit in and said, hey, we have found that schools are making errors in these areas. Here's your opportunity for the next 3 days to check that. And any
So these
school,
could have been checked and
Correct.
changed then. Okay.
correct.
Okay, that makes.
But I guess
thank
I'm
you.
just more concerned about us not being able to capture those seniors if they complete after the school year, if they complete in the summer. And so just kind of looking at the bigger picture.
Member Broussard, we are taking it forward to the ATAC, and we've been looking
Okay.
at some analysis. If we could move it to July 31st, the CCRI. So we're not entertaining. We're looking to see if that'll still keep us on track for a timely release
Okay.
and review of their data. That way, if we get them through July, all the APs in and things like that. But I want to look at the impact study before we just say we're going to move it.
No, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's good to know.
Okay, so
And-
I did second, sorry.
Executive Director Williams, thank you for that side note. I do recall reading that myself, and that note, and I do want to just acknowledge the department for your work on the grader. This past year, it has been so helpful, the recent versions that I have read. So if there's a way for us to continue to encourage schools and districts to begin to really look at that information, I think it is very useful and user-friendly. Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second to deny Gateway Early College High School. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Number 5 is Joseph City High School.
The notes I have in here. Were cut off. Okay, I'll look at the other spreadsheet.
Joseph City High School, in the department's estimation, the impact of that would result in a higher letter grade. Joseph City High School failed to submit their CCRI point totals at all.
Okay. Seems pretty.
So, Catcher, they failed to submit their point totals. Do we have evidence? It seems that the school submitted it, perhaps. So, or have we seen any evidence of their spreadsheet or any timestamps or anything that would suggest that it was completed in a timely manner? There seems to be some sort of breakdown that occurred here.
Member K, we don't have any documentation other than that which was submitted by the school, which I think is probably what you're looking at, which is the appeal with that paragraph or two, and then the attached spreadsheet, which has some information submitted but is not time stamped. in any way that I can see. And, members, I think this is something that the committee could potentially view a little bit differently if the other CCRI submissions had incorrect data. Maybe there were students that were missing that should have been in there. Joseph City High School, it could be incorrect data, but internal processes broke down and they failed to even submit the spreadsheet.
So, Catcher, I have some real concerns with this one. Although you don't want to penalize the school and the work appeared to have been done, I think this one really opens the door for schools. You miss a deadline, you don't submit. So I'm really having a hard time with this one. I don't know how anyone else feels, but I am not comfortable moving forward with the approval recommendation for approval on this one.
Never allow another submittal for the, I should speak into the microphone. One thought, because it's kind of heartbreaking. We've all forgotten things. This was just a really important thing. And so if we were to consider, we could possibly think along the lines of the committee in the future will not entertain any appeals from this district regarding this same issue of unsubmitted data. Kind of like this is your only shot.
And it looks like they've actually improved some of the processes. I think some of it had to do with who had access to make the submission. And
because it was a new process.
Right. The principal in the future requests the superintendent to make the submission in writing. And they are right, the mistake is unrelated to student performance and outside of the high school's control. The district is responsible for granting access to responsible parties to ADE Correct. So it sounds like the superintendent had access and the principal did not, and now they have, they're working to change that system is how I understood this.
Yeah, like you thought. I thought you had it, thought I had it kind of situation.
And I agree with you. We've all missed deadlines. This, as you mentioned, this one's a really big one. And for me, where I struggle is how is this any different than some of the other conversations we've had where somebody forgot to input students, whether or a withdrawal code or some of those. So, but this is a really big one to miss.
It is, but I think it's all of them. I don't think it was just a group or a few or some. This was, they had 0 CCRI. Is that correct?
So going back to the process, they had the opportunity to submit in the summer, and then the window was reopened in the fall, and they still didn't submit in the fall. They missed 2 windows.
Basically, they've had 3 windows. Because they had the 2 annual ones, and then you opened it up again.
They had just the 2. So they had the one to submit by July 13, and then there was a window open at the end of August, early September. And that one was, I think, for about a week.
But it's my understanding they did not know they hadn't submitted. From how I read this, they didn't know until they saw their letter grade, and then they sort of backed in and were concerned what their letter grade was. And so if you don't know that you did something incorrect or you didn't follow one step. I guess I tend to share Member Broussard's thoughts in that for this one time I would want to grant, would like to recommend approval. But I think now that we'll make it very clear, and it sounds like you're communicating to the field that you just need, I think all schools should double check their data. And had they done that, I think it would have come out. So I would, was that a motion to recommend approval? Or I will move to recommend approval of Joseph City High School.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Member Burton and a second from Member Broussard to recommend approving Joseph City High School's appeal. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
And the motion passes 2-1. Thank you. Next up is number 6, which is Santa Rita.
Before we get to Santa Rita, can we add, I mean, I do think Member Kay had some good comments and Member Broussard on the last item. Can we add that to our bucket of things to consider in the future?
Remember, were you maybe talking about what Member Broussard had brought up with, maybe not considering appeals from the school in the future if
and also some kind of certification process. I know they don't submit their spreadsheet, but somehow, maybe as you were talking about, some kind of affidavit that this is correct and this is in fact what happened.
Yeah, Member Burton, I think that kind of goes back to some of the conversations that were earlier and some of the steps that we're going to try to put in place. Frankly, as long as CCRI spreadsheets are self-reported and as long as there's opportunities to appeal based on incorrect data, there's always going to be this tension. But yeah, I think it goes back to what we had mentioned before, is some of the processes that we can try to put in place. And I think it's definitely on the list of things to continue discussing.
Yeah. Okay.
So members with Santa Rita,
Or maybe I have an old version. Is Miami Junior Senior High no longer on the list?
Member K, yeah, that was one that was
Withdrawn.
put into the dismissal bucket.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that was actually not necessarily moved in terms of a recommendation change. That was a typographical error on my part.
Thank you.
So with Santa Rita, again, a CCRI concern that the department says if the committee feels it falls within the scope would result in a higher letter grade. And as you can see in the appeal explanation, Santa Rita had an internal cutoff date that was earlier than the state deadline for submitting CCRI. And that data that was submitted just around their own internal deadline was not actually inputted into the CCRI spreadsheet, which was due a couple days later. And then, so that's one part, that was one student. And then there were several students, roughly a dozen, who were incorrectly inputted. It looks like, based on some of the software programs that they were using, had some issues.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably something I should have been doing up to this point, but giving you the letter grade that they received and the ones they were requesting, but you all have that information as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they're requesting a change in letter grade from an F to a D. Is that correct? And they are, looks like they are making efforts to correct the processes and data issues, and they will review it before submission going forward.
So this one, I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Go ahead.
I am comfortable recommending approval based on the steps they're taking to mitigate this in the future, particularly on the courses that were offered through the JTED and the coding. And it sounds like there was just a misunderstanding of the coding, but they have it. They have this one resolved for the future, and it would change their letter grade. So I'm comfortable recommending approval of their letter grade from an F to a D.
And I'll second that.
A motion and a second to recommend approving. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? And the motion passes. Number 7 is Westland School. And members, there's in case you're having problems finding it, there's 2 Westland schools. There's Westland School and there's,
Right.
I think, Westland School, Brighton campus.
This is Westland.
This is just Westland. And members, there's several parts of Westland's appeal, chronic absenteeism, special education, and also CCRI. I don't know if
It's resubmitted, remember? When we started asking questions about their SPED and
Oh,
CCRI.
yeah, that's right.
Sorry. Members of the committee, they originally submitted with 3 different appeals, and we started asking for more information because we couldn't verify what they were saying about SPED and CCRI. When we started asking questions, they took those 2 out to where it's only CCRI that's left.
Okay.
When you go into the folder, there should be a second application of their appeal that is only
much briefer.
Yeah, just much briefer, just saying CCRI. So,
Yeah, the one that says CCR points were missing, 1 student who earned 2 points.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's the only explanation we get for that? Is it? Okay. I was just wondering if I was missing some other. Well, maybe in the other.
So just for clarification from the department, so they are citing that they are missing 1 student who earned 3 points, which would give them 13 points, and that 1 student would give them a higher letter grade.
I guess I just need more information on where that student came from, how it was missing and left off, and
I remember, Broussard,
I think the 2 documents don't match. So there's the appeal, and then there's the appeal 2 that is limited to CCRI. And this one says missing 1 student earned 2 points for a total of 12.1. On the prior document, it said 3 points.
giving a new total of 13.1. But either way, it would change their letter grade if it was just 2 points.
Members, let me double check that just to
Okay.
make sure. I want to give you accurate
I
information.
know, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
And Member Broussard, to your point earlier about a documentation concern,
Do you not remember what I said?
no, I'm sorry, I'm still processing my
Okay.
thought. I'm thinking that
I was going to help you.
I'm thinking that, with the other incorrect data in CCRI that we've had up to this point, it has been much more extensively documented than this.
Yeah.
And there's also usually been, if not in every case, there's been factors that they have cited as to why those students were incorrectly included or excluded, whether it be, coding errors with their software system or the deadlines internally, or in the case of grad rate, sometimes just how you code those students. But there has been documentation with each of those.
Yeah.
And with this one, there has not been. And that is something that is required to help
Affects my
support.
decision.
And
Absolutely.
something that the committee could consider.
That and just providing the 2 spreadsheets with a lot of information, but no notes as to what we're
What it
looking
is,
at or
yeah.
looking for.
I didn't even, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a quick note, members. So our notes in there had to do with about N count, because the impact of a student on CCRI is at most 2.2. But that's if they also kick into the bonus point with the student. So on their own, at an N count of 10, so that's the maximum they could get for one student, would be a 1.2. And then if they were kicked into the bonus point, 2.2. So both of those things would have to be, they would have to have a really low N count. And they would also have to qualify for bonus point. And so because we didn't have the complete information, that's why I said this could be
Yeah.
accurate. But that's best case scenario is if, because of the math, Caitlin Drake's our what we call CCRI commander. She knows this stuff inside and out, but she was explaining to me that it would have to be a really low N count, and they would have to qualify through bonus points for this one student as well. So not only is this not as well documented, it depends on a couple of factors
Yeah.
going their way.
Well, I would like to move to recommend denying this request or this appeal for letter grade change based on the incorrect CCI data, I guess, and the fact that we don't know more about it. I don't have enough information to make any other decision.
I would second that.
A motion from Member Broussard and a second from Member Kay to deny based on a lack of information and documentation. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All of those opposed, nay. And the motion passes. The last school that we have as part of the CCRI bucket, and again, some of these might bleed over into some of the others, but it's Pan American Charter School. So, members, Pan American cites the students that they think should have certain points, and the points that correspond with those students. And ADEs indicated that if those students were included, it would impact their letter grade.
I feel like this is another case where I'm not really sure. It does mention that they inadvertently failed to report that 9 of 18 students met all the requirements. So they inputted some data and left 9 students out. But I don't know why or how they overlooked those 9 students.
And I'm back to, they had an opportunity to address this in the fall. So did they simply just miss the window a second time to correct this information?
Yeah, like they didn't realize they had missed that information until the letter grades came out.
Right. And I'm concerned about going down that path because I think the CCRI component of the formula is really important, and I think it's something that schools value, and it gives schools an opportunity to demonstrate other factors in the way they're preparing students for success. And at some point, we're going to have to, Ketcher mentioned the tension between this is self-reported and, whether it's verifiable or not. So missing these windows, to me, becomes critical. Mm-hmm. You just have to adhere to the deadlines, get the data right on the front end, because we don't want to go down a path where this is the area that is constantly being appealed.
Yeah.
So I am not comfortable moving forward with the approval for Pan American Charter School.
Members, just to sorry, I'm pulling up Santa Rita, and I just want to make sure that we're consistent in that.
Sure.
I mean, really, up to this point, actually, the schools that have been approved in this CCRI bucket were, with the exception of one, which is what I'll talk about, have been approved really for graduation rate. But the other ones have been denials or dismissals. Santa Rita, however, which was recommended for approval, was based solely on their CCRI. And Santa Rita had some students that, and this was the synergy, this was the issue that they had with their software. So
there was some documentation provided for Santa Rita.
Yeah, so Santa Rita did provide the SACE IDs, the corresponding CTE courses, and then SACE IDs, CTE courses. Actually, they're all CTE courses that they were that were not included in the front end. I get part of the reason I bring it up is that if the committee is seeking to recommend denying because they don't think that we should be accepting CCRI revisions at all, blanket statement, then we should probably go back and revisit Santa Rita. Yeah. If, however, the committee is saying, well, we will accept those, but we feel that Santa Rita documented it and showed more appropriate reasons for why it was not inputted, which Santa Rita is saying is for they had software issues. Then that would be, I think, maybe the route that the committee should explore, because I think Pan American doesn't necessarily cite the reasons why that information was not inputted correctly, or the steps that they're taking to rectify, or the steps that they took to mitigate it.
Right.
Only that the information is inaccurate.
Mm-hmm. For me, Santa Rita, that crossover with the JTED and Synergy and the coding and the confusion there was why I was comfortable with Santa Rita. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, this just says we inadvertently failed to report.
Yeah, and that's not sound enough reason for me to feel comfortable recommending this one.
Okay. Do we have a motion? I don't think we had a motion. I think we're still waiting. Okay.
I was about to ask you if you wanted to make a motion.
I will move to recommend that we deny the appeal for Pan American Charter School.
I'll second.
A motion from Member Kay and a second from Member Burton to recommend denying the appeal for Pan American Charter School. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. And the motion passes. Members, are we still doing good? Do we need a break or anything, or just keep chugging? Just want to do a checkup.
Say we keep moving.
Okay.
Are we making a dent?
Yes. So we're 12 through and there's 29. So we're getting
Okay.
there. So this next bucket is graduation rate calculations. Again, some of these sort of bled into the CCRI stuff. And the first up here is Girls Leadership Academy. And Girls Leadership Academy, again, it's graduation rate.
No notes.
And ADE did check the data, and if those students were included, they would be have their letter grade, impacted. If they're, by the way, also in some of these appeals, in the PDFs and the summary documents, it's hard to pull down some of the other information. That's the way that the PDF is set up. And it looks like some schools maybe printed out the PDF and then scanned it and sent it in. So just to let you know as to why sometimes there's some...
And in this case, the 915s were processed to correct the information.
No, it says that if their 915s had been processed.
Oh, okay. My notes didn't have that first line. Okay.
The 915 was open to request the opportunity to submit data corrections. And so I believe because it looks like they're working to correct the omission. So because of that, I'm comfortable with moving to recommend approval for the letter grade change for the Girls Leadership Academy of Arizona from a C to a B based on incorrect data regarding their graduation rates.
I'll second that.
Motion from Member Broussard and a second from Member Burton to approve Girls Leadership Academy's letter grade. All those in favor, or any discussion, I should be asking that first. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion passes. Next up is Ironwood Ridge High School. Ironwood Ridge, again, is another amphitheater high school. They did not submit a CCRI portion of theirs like the other Amphi schools, only a graduation rate. As you can see, AD has some pretty extensive notes with a lot of if-then statements, so I will leave it to them to expand on that if you'd like. And in their appeal, they said that they identified 26 students with withdrawal codes and year-end codes of P and not reported designations, and an additional 32 who were enrolled at other schools and other factors. Oh no, it's 32 total. And then they have additional documentation on those 32 students and their current whereabouts. Again, I'm sure Alan and the department would be happy to expand on anything if you have questions.
Members of the committee, essentially it amounts to their math is wrong, but their appeal is right.
I'm sorry.
Their math was incorrect, but their appeal is right. So their numbers were incorrect, but even doing the math correctly, their appeal would be correct if all 32 students were changed, pretty much. We have to assume that we can't do the if only 30, no. If all 32, yes. So that's what that long explanation amounts to, is that their original math was incorrect, but their point is still correct.
Yeah.
And they do have documentation.
So in their documentation, can you explain to me on the individual students, I think it says page 2 at the top, exit code not provided, year-end code P, and then there are some that say SC. What do those codes mean?
So P means promoted, and SC, I forget what it means, but it's basically the same thing, that they were a senior that didn't graduate. So I think it's
Senior by credit.
Senior by credit?
Yeah, it might be correct. But I know both of those essentially mean seniors that did not graduate.
Okay.
And so we've seen this problem with schools where they meant to mark somebody a G and mark them a P, and they thought they were the same thing. And those are different.
Because they're used to marking them as P their freshman year, their sophomore year, their junior year, and like, oh yeah, they passed their senior year, so obviously, yeah, I can see where that confusion. I didn't have any concerns on this one when I read it at home, and so because of that, I'll make a recommendation. Well, I'll move to make a recommendation to the board for approval of Ironwood Ridge High School based on the incorrect data for graduation, right? That was the only thing they cited.
That will take. They will take their letter grade from a
C to a B. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second to approve Ironwood Ridge High School's appeal. Recommend approving it. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes.
It makes me feel better when you have to stop and think about the same thing I keep stopping and thinking about. I'm not alone.
The third school here is Sonoran Science Academy, Davis-Monthan. And again, Sonoran Science Academy, it's a graduation rate appeal. The explanation in this one is much shorter.
I printed this out not in alphabetical order.
And members, I think in the appeal, there's a brief explanation as to the graduation rate and how it was calculated incorrectly internally. And there's a follow-up sentence there that says communication between the school and the research department can be shared upon request. We didn't request that communication. I don't think the department did either. Just to let you know. And also, members, again, I don't sometimes want to be careful about inferring too much, but within the appeal, you also see part of the narrative is that they appealed to this error in July and still waiting on the correction. I don't know if that means a 15-9-15 or not.
Okay.
Or if that was an appeal, maybe that they tried to talk to the department about in accountability. I'm not sure, but.
Can you speak to that?
So, thinking back to yesterday, we had the appeal about the data prior to FY 2016 not being able to be changed. So this is that in FY 2015, a student moved out of state, but there was not a code for that yet. So they marked them as a student that had left the district, which are different codes. And so that student, apparently, when it moved over to our new system, did pick up that code. So this is something that can't be changed, but I think, if I remember correctly, is due to a change in our
the system. Not in.
Yes. So
Okay.
I don't know. It can't be changed, but it's not entirely their fault that we moved to a new system and this code didn't exist at the time in the old system.
Got it.
So based on that, I'm comfortable recommending approval for their appeal to move from a B to an A based on the incorrect data.
Okay, I'm sorry.
For the grad rate calculation. Based on incorrect data
the
or
switchover
discrepancy.
of the systems not having a code for that.
Yeah, and I'll second that.
Okay, so Member Kay made a motion. Was there a second there, and a second from Member Burton? And just to be clear, or maybe for my own clarity, it's based on the system change that did not have the appropriate code, and not as a result of changing that student from
Changing their status.
from several fiscal years ago.
Correct.
Yes.
There
Okay.
isn't. It seems like there isn't a way for them to change that code now. So there's
Well-
We can
They
members, we can work with our IT department to do that.
okay.
But we're, as I understand it, not changing data, just changing grades. So this is the lone exception we've seen of this. So it's possible we could have this done, but it's not, as we understand it, in line with other things we're doing.
Okay.
This was a coding issue between the two systems.
And the code, yeah, it's not existing, a separate code for out of state, not existing
Right.
prior.
Just want to make that clear. Okay. All those in favor? Is where we were.
I'm sorry, members. Can I get a beat here? Can I just talk to AD very briefly offline, if you don't mind?
Members of the committee, if you want to take like a 5-minute break,
That actually
that would be appropriate at this time.
Members, thank you. I'm sorry. I just needed a beat just to make sure that we were consistent with what we had been doing, and I think based on that explanation and talking to the department, I think we feel pretty comfortable that we are. So take that beat. So we had a motion and a second to approve the appeal for Sonoran Science Academy, Davis Monthan. Is that correct? And is everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So all those in favor of that appeal, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. So members, we're actually, I'm hoping, if it's okay with you, that we switch up the order a little bit to those schools that are highlighted. And part of that reason is because we may be losing some staff support soon. So we want to try to prioritize those that we may still need it.
No.
No.
We have to work. You have to work. This isn't when you wanted me to pull that out. Just kidding.
So first, if we can move to that other section, and then the first highlight school, which is Desert Heights Charter School. And Desert Heights had a couple parts of their appeal. One was incorrect data, which is kind of why we bumped it up here, and specifically related to their chronic absenteeism.
This one has to do with a registrar incorrectly entering partial and full day absences.
Right. Okay.
Member Burton, that's correct. And there's a couple ADM summaries that are attached along with a letter from the registrar themselves at the school. And there's a second part of that appeal in the summary that doesn't have further documentation about being designated a K4 or something with their school configuration.
But that's out of the scope of this committee. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So really the committee should only be looking at that chronic absenteeism, and the department did say that that would impact their letter grade.
Any discussion? So I would move to approve Desert Heights Charter School based on the data issues spelled out regarding partial and full day absenteeism. I've heard of this being confusing to small and large schools, so I understand. I think it's well documented. So I would move to recommend approval of changing their letter grade.
I'll second.
A motion by Member Burton and a second by Member Broussard to recommend approval for Desert Heights Charter School. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, nay. And the ayes have it, and the motion passes. Next up is Paulden Community School. I'll give you time to pull it up, but essentially how Paulden took a little bit of time to determine the impact of their letter grade, and the department can go into more details, but basically to try to summarize is that Paulden sent tests to the incorrect site. Once those tests were recovered and ADE was able to input it into the system, it would impact the letter grade as outlined by the school. And
yeah.
And actually, I'm sorry. That would increase their letter grade from a C to a B if those tests were included.
And they do have documentation
Yeah.
in emails.
Yes.
And had you been in communication? It looks like ADE had been in communication with them.
Mm-hmm.
Members, I believe it was the assessment team was in communication. Maybe I'm misremembering. But yes, AD was in communication with them.
Okay.
And members, we had another school submitted appeal with test records being sent to the incorrect site or getting lost in transit. But that was actually one of the schools that withdrew because it was not going to impact their letter grade and they didn't move forward. Mm-hmm. So, it is something that sometimes happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm good.
So I'd move to approve the change of the letter grade for Paulden Community School based on the mail issues.
I second.
It's a motion by Member Burton and a second by Member Kay to approve Paulden Community Schools' appeal to include those test records, which would improve them from a C to a B.
That's correct.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. And now if we can skip down to Tucson Country Day School. Tucson Country Day School was one of those schools that the department had been working diligently to try to get some additional information. And I don't, basically where we're at is we don't have additional information, and the department couldn't make a determination if that's
right.
Mm-hmm. So I think what the committee is left with is this is an appeal based on incorrect data. The committee does not have information on how that incorrect data would impact their letter grade from the department. The department tried to obtain that additional information. So really an option for the committee is to make a determination based on the information it has.
That's not enough.
Or to potentially try to run down some more information. But this is what we have as of right now.
This is not something we're waiting on the school for, is it?
Member Kay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The information that we're waiting on, who is providing that?
Member Kay, my understanding, again, maybe Alan wants to jump in here, ADE with the information that was submitted to them could not make a determination, and so they requested the school to provide some additional info, and that has not been received. But
members, if I could expand on it. So when test scores are sent in, if something is incorrect, they go into a corrections app is what we call it. So say a name is Smith Jones and the kid didn't put the hyphen, something like that. And so we were looking to see if they were in the corrections app for the initial batch, and they were not. And so we thought perhaps they were in the late submission. Maybe they sent a box somewhere wrong or something along those lines. So we waited until the late submission came in. Still not seeing it. Still not in the corrections app. So they have test scores that we currently cannot validate, and we actually have our IT team trying to do what they can to see if there's anything we can do, if it's something on our end. But where we would look, where they should come in for us, they're not there, and they're not in what we would call the data corrections app. Okay. So we can't verify what they're saying either way to be able to say the impact of it. And we've not seen this before, hence why we're trying to get an answer on it, and we're not sure if it is an error on our end, their end, who we're working through that right now. Yeah. But currently we cannot verify student test scores that they say they have.
Is it you're just not hearing back from them, or they're having trouble finding what you need, or what?
We worked with our assessments unit to try and solve this, and to my knowledge, we've not heard back any information from
the district.
We wanted to start and make sure it was our problem first, and so we've started with our IT team, because the last thing we want to do is accuse a district of doing something incorrectly when it might be just a weird error with this one school that for some reason didn't get caught. So we're waiting for our IT team to see if the issue was on our end before we start faulting the district. We want to make sure that we're correct, that we've looked everywhere we can for an explanation beforehand.
So we're still in that part of the process?
We still have not heard back.
And I feel like we need to table it.
I think so too.
I feel like we need to table this. So I would move to table this until we receive. Do we need to say the December 17th meeting, or just until we get the rest of the data for this case?
Member Broussard, I think for one, probably shouldn't put a date certain because we haven't actually solidified that date, but until the committee meets next might be an appropriate time to table it. And then at that time, if the committee doesn't have any additional information and still feels like we want to wait, then we can make the determination then. But I think it would be appropriate to table it until the appeals committee meets again.
Okay.
So moved would be.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
So a motion and a second to table Tucson Country Day School until we have additional information to make a determination potentially at the next meeting of the ADEF Appeals Committee, which is TBD. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion
Wait,
passes.
did you say Paulding Community School? You said Tucson Country Day
Tucson,
School?
yes,
Okay.
Tucson Country Day School. And I'll actually unhighlight these. Actually, no, I'll leave them highlighted to make sure we know that we finished those. So let's go back to where we left off, if that's all right, which is the next category up here that I have highlighted.
Jasinski?
Jasinski, yes. Stephen R. Jasinski. And also,
Thank you.
although they are individual schools, you could probably also include Sundance Elementary School as they are in the same district and also citing the same factors.
Where is it?
So, Catcher, to be sure I'm clear, this one's a PDF, and I've got 3 pages. And so really it's just the narrative within the appeal application. Is there or was there a way to verify the attendance percentages that the school submitted? So I don't see anything from their student information system that verifies these percentages. It's simply a narrative.
And then I didn't have anything in my notes.
Right, so there was nothing from
And there was nothing from
ADE.
ADE in the spreadsheet.
Members, that's correct, and that's partially, ADE didn't provide any additional information or notes or analyses if it was not incorrect data, and these were not appeals based on incorrect data. These were appeals based on events. Member Katie, your question as to, is there any other documentation? You know, all we have are those PDFs with the narratives. And I don't know if there's another question in there that I failed to answer, but you can let me know.
No, I don't think so. So that's my concern. Do I think that this situation could have created this scenario and resulted in these percentages? I do. I'm surprised that the school didn't submit any backup data to support this, as we've seen in other cases. So that's where I think I'm just having a little bit of an issue with it. This is an important decision and it's an important appeal, and we're left with a simple narrative and no backup.
I think even with that, though, I'm all right. Because I saw it happen all over the state. So that's where I stand on that.
And I agree. We saw it happen all over the state, but these are the only schools appealing based on that. However, I would support
Okay.
the appeal. I guess for future appeals for schools, I certainly would like to see any corresponding data that they have and encourage them to provide that as evidence and not just leave it to the narrative.
Yeah, and Member K, it is something that's built into the policies and procedures. Supporting evidence for the appeal must be submitted with the application. So again, I mean, we had a situation earlier where the committee felt that, and so when we talk about supporting evidence, I mean, at some point it is, when a school submits one sentence, I mean, I think pretty clearly that is something that the committee objectively is, there's no supporting evidence. For something like this, it becomes a little more subjective. Does the committee feel that there was enough evidence there? That's sort of something that the committee has to determine, but
Well, yeah, because, and I can see maybe they just weren't detailed enough because they did give us some percentages, but
They didn't submit school attendance data that they are
yes.
likely keeping.
Well, we've seen ADM reports,
Right.
those sorts of things. At the same time, given the situation, given the event that occurred that they're citing, that we certainly all felt,
Right.
I'm comfortable moving forward with recommending their approval. I guess I just make that comment for future
with the
schools who are planning to appeal. So I am comfortable recommending approval for Jasinski and Sundance Elementary School.
I can second that.
Thank you.
A motion by Member Kay and a second by Member Broussard to recommend approving the two appeals, one for Jasinski Elementary and also Sundance Elementary School. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. The next bucket of issues are technology issues. Coronado Elementary.
Give it all to them.
Coronado Elementary had issues administering the assessment, and this was specific to Ames Science.
Okay.
And also, members, if you'll notice, there's two PDFs in there. The school did submit its initial appeal, and actually staff, after the school contacted board staff, and staff did recommend presenting some additional documentation. So that's why there's another
Okay.
portion in there. And also the appeal on the front page where they would submit their AZ merit scores. This is, and we actually, we got this question a lot. Schools were asking what kind of data we were looking for on their AZ merit scores. Is it that school-wide? Is it specific to the grades? We had generally been recommending to include the school-wide percent passing rates. And then if they wanted to submit additional information that was specific to their appeal, you know, like grade levels, or if it was Ames Science, then we recommended that they would submit that. For this school, the school did ask if they should still submit those AZ merit scores. And we advised them that because the appeal is specific to Ames Science, that they did not have to. So this is another one where it's kind of like they were advised not to, so don't hold it against them.
So we requested, they requested more data, and we weren't given anything other than this, right? There was already a trend of decline from 15, declined 5 percentage points in 2016. Whoops, I just closed it out. And then somebody wanted
Another 4 in 17 and 2 in 18.
So I personally don't feel comfortable without some other, it may have stressed teachers out, but I'm not sure an hour delay stressed them out to the point where they were going to drop another 2 percentage points regardless of whether or not they were delayed to start their testing. So that's where I stand.
I saw it the same way. It seemed like there was a negative trend that has already been.
I hope that it's, you know.
Yeah.
And the And the issue was just the delay in the start time. They still completed the test, is that?
No, they hadn't even started.
They hadn't started.
Right.
So it wasn't like they had a interruption in the middle of the test.
Right.
That's, yeah, those are different.
Also, I see that they were kind of talking internally with each other, but it seems that they solved the issue before it ever escalated anywhere else, maybe. But
I'm sure it caused some anxiety amongst the teachers, but I'm not sure it did amongst the test takers.
yeah.
I agree.
And the documentation has more to do with what is going on amongst the faculty, the
Yep.
staff.
Yeah.
And members, so they are on the cusp of well, actually, I need to see where they are.
They're looking for a B to an A.
Right, and I want to look to see how close they are to an A. The threshold for the 17-18 school year for receiving the bonus points for science is 80.8%, I think. And if they are at, what did they cite, 78%? So they're close there, but I want to see how close they are. If you give me a second. And again, I think, remember, something that you can also consider is this additional digging that we're doing right now is, things that could have been submitted as part of documentation. So I'm sorry. So they received 75.64 points. To receive an A, they need the cut score is at 84.6. Well, I'm sorry. No, they were at their percentage earned. Sorry, I was looking at their total points. So they are at 84 was their percentage earned. The cut score is at 84.6. They received probably the 1.5, because on our bonus points on the public file, it's not separated, but they probably received the 1.5 science bonus points. They would have received another 1.5 if they had gotten to 80.8% proficient on AIM science. And that additional 1.5 points would have put them at an A. So really, I think the committee needs to consider if the trend lines were trending that way, regardless of any technology issues, if the technology issues had a significant impact on the outcomes of the students, and if the documentation supports those two potential conclusions.
Yeah, so what bothers me is that the trend was, it stuck with the trend. In fact, they dropped a little less than they had in the prior 2 years. And had that not been the case, I probably would be more inclined
to approve.
I agree. And going back to, given they're asking to go from a B to an A, and this is an important process, and I'm thinking about the documentation. We requested more. What has been provided is limited. It didn't appear to rise to the level that outside resources were even contacted. So I would move to recommend denial of the appeal and have them remain at a B based on the information provided.
I'll second with the comment that if there were documentation that students had been kicked off several times and some of their work lost, but that would have helped if we had some of that documentation. But without it, I'll second the motion.
Motion by Member Kay and a second by Member Broussard to recommend denying Coronado Elementary's appeal. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. And the motion passes. Marion Donaldson is the other school that cited technology issues. Marion Donaldson also is in the Amphi School District. And so members, there's citation of a computer glitch. There's also affidavits submitted from teachers describing the computer's screens freezing and students being anxious.
Yeah. This is kind of pretty much exactly what I was referring to, along with
Yes.
And members,
this sworn affidavit.
yes, and also members, if at the beginning of the appeal, it's a computer glitch specific based on the narrative to 3rd and 4th grade students taking the ELA portion. When you look at the data that was provided by the school, again, the data in the documentation, those 3rd grade students had been trending up from 2014 through 2016, 17. And then there was a pretty noticeable drop for those 3rd grade students passing. At the same time, those same 3rd graders in math, that was one of their highest percent passings since AZ Merit had been administered. And there's a similar effect, although not on math, but certainly a similar trend that seems disrupted in 4th grade ELA.
So
And
now they're requesting a B, and that's the only thing that makes me pause. So they don't just want to jump from a D to a C. They want to go ahead and jump all the way up to a B. And I'm not so sure. Is that not what you have?
No,
Am I looking at the wrong?
I had, in my notes, I'm comfortable approving them for a C.
Yeah, me too, but they were requesting a B. So,
So can we change, we
can
do that? Yeah.
Yeah, we think we can do that, but I just wanted to note that I don't know that the results of their test would have improved so much that it would bump them up. Is that even possible from a D to an A?
Member Broussard, I don't know.
A D to a B.
A D to a B. I don't know. I think, honestly, we had some schools, and maybe not specific for just 2 grade level assessments. There are some schools who made pretty dramatic improvements, from 16, 17 to 17, 18. I don't know if the 2 grade levels and 2 subjects of 2 grade levels affected would have had a similar jump. I'm not sure. I mean, I will say, again, with the limited precedent that we have or history that may help lend itself to information here. The committee last year did not recommend, and I think there were some schools that were recommending a 2-letter grade jump, and usually if it did recommend approval, stuck with the 1-letter grade.
Yeah, so, and I see here that it says the low passing rate is not characteristic for the school, which was rated a B the previous year. If the passing rates had not decreased, the overall points would have been the same as the 2017 letter grade B. So I guess in order for me to have made that determination to take it all the way up to a B, I would kind of want to see side by side last year numbers with this year's numbers. Had not changed at all, with the exception of that testing, and that would have made a more compelling case. But that not having been submitted, I move to recommend that we approve that Marion Donaldson Elementary School receive a C instead of a D. I don't know why I keep reading that
I'll
backwards.
second that.
All right, a motion by Member Broussard and a second by Member Burton to approve Marion Donaldson, recommend approving Marion Donaldson for a C. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. And the motion passes. The next group of schools cited school tragedies or some other event along those lines. And first up is Bernard Black. Bernard Black, just to sort of sum up, says that a fire alarm was pulled while the third grade students were testing. Those students were pulled out in the middle of the testing, obviously to evacuate. There's some documentation about the fire alarm going off. There's also some scores that are provided on AZ Merit, and they do say that it is the third grade kiddos who were yanked because of that fire alarm, and based on some of the data, it does appear that although there might have been a trend line down, certainly third grade in that year was affected as well.
Mm-hmm.
This one was easy for me.
Yeah.
Because when you have those young kiddos, I know that teaching in kindergarten, actually, I'd have kids, no matter how much preparing, and I would start weeks ahead of time. And just because we would have a conversation about it, kids would be crying and hiding under tables, and it can be really stressful. By third grade, I know that a lot of that angst is gone, but that is really disruptive. Mm-hmm. Now they're outside in the fresh sunshine. The last thing they want to do is go back and test. So for me, I'd like to move to recommend
Changing the letter grade.
accepting that change of letter grade for Bernard Black Elementary. And I can't find it on here. Where are we
From
changing
a
it?
D to a C.
From a D to a C,
And I'll second that.
based on that fire drill.
No, fire alarm.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, fire alarm. Okay, so that's a motion by Member Broussard and a second by Member Burton to recommend approval of Bernard Black Elementary's appeal. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. And the motion passes. Deer Valley Academy is next. Deer Valley has a few things going on, but essentially they're requesting to be not rated. And they had a loss of a staff member who it looks like was primarily responsible for tracking assessment data and keeping up with some of the things that are going on at the state level. And the documentation provided is that one pager that's attached to the appeal.
Right.
Ketra, can you recall, has an NR ever been given for a situation even remotely close to this?
Member Burton, no, not in the last year or so.
Okay.
The board has approved appeals based on school tragedies before.
Yeah. I can't find my Deer Valley.
I think, if I recall last year, I think the board might have denied an appeal even with the school tragedy, simply because the correlation to the data and the circumstances around it weren't sufficient.
And their letter grade is currently a D, and they're just asking to be not rated.
So, as heartbreaking as this situation is, and I don't doubt that it affected so many in the district or in the school, I'm not sure, how much it affected the students and their performance. Or the services that are offered to them.
I would concur with that. To me, there's not a clear line to how it impacted student performance. And as you said, absolutely it had an impact in terms, I don't doubt that, on the school. But there isn't a clear path to how that occurred or why, or I just don't see it based on the information that has been provided.
And she was responsible for analyzing, a lot of the student performance and district assessments, and but I feel like, yeah.
Not like a teacher. She was an administrator.
She was
Assessment
testing
coordinator.
and curriculum. Assessment coordinator.
Yeah.
Testing and assessment. So
Certainly a challenge for smaller schools when one person gets ill.
And so, Catcher, the AZ merit scores, the NR, is that due to an N count size maybe? Why is there no information available?
Member K, we didn't look into it specifically, but I would assume it's due to N size.
I'm not comfortable.
So I, again, based on some of the conversation that we have had and the comments that I have made, I would recommend denying the appeal and leaving their grade at letter D.
I second.
A motion by Member K and a second by Member Broussard to deny Deer Valley Academy's appeal. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion passes. Next is Lowell Elementary. Lowell's in the Phoenix Elementary School District. And again, a school tragedy, also a narrative, about a 2-page narrative attached, and quite a bit of data and also some additional documentation.
So based on the data that they provided, and it is extensive, breaking it down to the grade level, the teacher's impact, outlining the series of events, the timeline, and there's quite a bit of information here. Based on that, I would, and I'm sure others probably want to talk, so I would recommend approving their letter grade to move from a D to a C.
I would second that for the same reasons. I thought it was well documented, and I thought it tragic, and I thought they did a good job explaining and providing data, backup data.
Motion by Member K and a second by Member Burton to recommending approving Lowell Elementary School. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Eloy Junior High School. Eloy is citing not a school tragedy, but another event, and that's the failure of their HVAC system.
Gosh, I know, that's so sad.
And based on the documentation, this happened
Several times.
several times, yes, both leading up to and through the testing window, I think.
And bless their hearts for not canceling school when that went out. I couldn't imagine how disruptive this was.
Yes.
And because of that, I'm going to go ahead and move to recommend the approval for their appeal based on their AC going out, and I'm looking for it here, to go from a C to a B.
I will second that. I thought it was well documented and very unfortunate.
That's a motion by Member Broussard and a second by Member Burton to recommend approving Eloy Junior High School's appeal. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. And the ayes have it. The motion passes. So now we're down to our last 4 schools here. And if you recall, the highlighted schools are ones that we already tackled. So we'll just start off with Academy of Math and Science, Camelback. And I think, members, you can and have read Academy of Math and Science's appeal and quite a bit of documentation to go along with it. I think maybe just to sort of summarize is that the school got a large amount of special education students, and most of those were after the October 1 deadline. That October 1 deadline is the deadline, the date that's used for the state and also for federal purposes for pulling special education enrollment.
So this could happen to any school. I guess the question here is, do we take into consideration that this was really an uncommon event, to receive that many? This isn't the one that had the issue with
Well, I think where I had a bit of a challenge with this one is, although the argument is that it's an unexpected substantive event, to me it felt like we were appealing along the lines of student characteristics. Mm-hmm. So that's where I was really struggling. And this, unfortunately, I think can happen to other schools. I'm not sure it is that uncommon. So that was my challenge with it.
Mm-hmm.
And they will be counted in the next year. So it's not.
Remember,
You
Burton,
have to have some time, some deadline to count for 1 year, and
it may affect it this year, but next year.
yeah.
Member Burton, if those students remain enrolled,
Mm-hmm.
then yes. And I think Member Broussard brought up a question, or maybe it was more of a comment, but did something happen that resulted in these students coming? I don't know if there's any documentation as to that.
I didn't, but thank you. Any additional information you can give us is always welcome. Okay. Well, I'm comfortable with
With a denial. Okay.
recommending
So we deny the
denial.
Academy of Math and Science, Camelback.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I
You do it. Please do it, because I was going to look and make sure I
Okay.
was. Go ahead.
Okay,
Don't.
it's getting late. I would move that we deny the appeal of Academy Math and Science, Camelback, and keep their letter grade at AC.
And I think it's only fitting that I second that motion.
So we have a motion by both Member Burton and Member Broussard with the appropriate second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion passes. Next up is Arizona City Elementary. Arizona City has, I believe, based on our notes, two portions of their appeal. One is not dissimilar from, that's a double negative maybe, that is not too much different from the one we just heard about special education students. And then there's also some documentation and citation of teachers missing days due to health issues.
Mm-hmm.
So the SPED issue that was raised, it sounds like the information that the department had was correct, so that one didn't stand. Okay.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up. Member K, I'm sorry. I think maybe I summarized it incorrectly. The special education issue that was cited, the department checked and said that those students were in fact coded correctly. It's just that those students came in after that October 1 deadline. So the data side of the appeal, the department said is not within the scope of the committee.
I see. Okay.
Wow. But if you look at the situations, these students who are in contact, especially it looks like the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, there was kind of an upheaval there. You've got the reading teacher for those 3 grades missing quite a few days. The writing teacher missing so much, and then they resigned, and then they had to reorganize all of the teachers.
And then a principal became the interim superintendent, is that correct?
Yes.
And the school had to function without a principal.
So while there's
That was just
no
a huge
doubt,
transition year.
absolutely
And a heart
huge
attack and-
transition year, I will say, just for future appeals, this is a case I would have liked to have seen prior benchmarks, prior year information on these students, what their trends were looking like, perhaps more than days absent. There's no question that teachers who are absent impact students. And I know they cited it, but I'm just back to some of that supporting data I would like to see in the future. That said, there was a lot happening in the school in that year. So based on that and the information that was provided, I would be comfortable recommending approval of their request to move from a D to a C.
I'll second.
A motion from Member Kane, a second by Member Broussard to recommend approving Arizona City Elementary's appeal. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. And the ayes have it, and the motion passes. I think something, members, that was also important that you called out, and I want to make a point of too, is that it wasn't just the teacher turnover or the tumult, it was the things that led to that teacher turnover, because I think there's recognition that teacher turnover and teacher shortages is a problem statewide. Mm-hmm. For this district, for the school, there were some very specific things like those health problems that led to sort of a chain reaction of events that.
Exactly.
Okay. And next up is Sweetwater Community School. Members, this one is unique. That school received a letter grade of a D. Last year, they did not receive a letter grade because they were an alternative school. And based on the documentation that you have, that school simply failed to submit their application to be an alternative school. Now, there are reminders that are sent to the schools that you need to reapply to be an alternative school.
They just made all the applications. They opened it up and made it available October 1st. So,
Deadline's in January.
yeah.
But they had administrative change, if I recall.
And
so this recertification was not submitted, nor were the CCRI indicators collected.
So they had a new
Administrator.
They did. I will say, what I struggle with is this is a large
Program.
It's a large program, and there are reminders. So I sort of view this one like I did the other, which I know you didn't agree with me, but this is an important, CCRI is important. The designation of alternative is important. The department sends out reminders. There's a process that occurs. Now, perhaps only one person was on the email listserv that this information is sent to. That's a possibility.
But we don't know
At
that.
the same time, I really struggle with missing this. So I am in the same spot that I was in on the other one. So if anyone wants to take a different stab, please do.
I just hope that they, and we don't see that in here, that they have some safeguards set in place that should this new director take a position somewhere else, that now they have more than one person at the school to, ensure that these things are entered and reported.
And members, I think that the conversation from yesterday and the school that was considered yesterday, it does in many ways, it is similar in many ways as what Member Kay pointed out in terms of the alternative school designation. This school, as opposed to that school, this school has been an alternative school for several years. I guess I was going to start pointing out all the differences and similarities, but I do just want to point out that, again, just like we try to strive for consistency in all of these, but also they are all unique.
There's that precedent set forward.
Yeah, no, and what I was referencing wasn't actually the school yesterday. It was the school earlier that didn't submit the CCRI at all. So that is my concern, but I hear you on yesterday's. They have been an alternative school very clearly.
And I do understand sometimes you have administrative changes, and they probably didn't have a backup process in place, and I would move to approve this, but again, noting that, Paradise Valley Unified School District, they're a pretty established school district that I think I would assume going forward would have systems in place so that this wouldn't happen again. So I would move to approve just with that note. Moving them to an alternative.
What was that?
I would
moving them to the alternative.
Yeah. To approve their an appeal, because I do think it was miscategorized, but based on communication administrative error, that I would hope going forward is corrected and systems are in place to make sure this doesn't happen again.
So, Ketra, I do have a question. So we do have the authority to put them into the alternative
or
bucket, even though they haven't been certified by the state as an alternative school for that year, or would it be an NR?
Member Kay, it's a good question. It's kind of a tricky one that, I don't know if
Oh, that's a very good point.
statute does require the board to adopt a model,
Right.
an ADF accountability model for alternative schools.
And they have been approved in the past, correct?
As
Or
an, yes, and I think
Recertify every year.
right.
That's what they didn't do.
So that's what they
Otherwise,
didn't
would have been
do.
in it.
And so that's where I
Can we table this and have them?
well, I don't know. I guess I just am wondering if we can have them, and this is maybe different than what these two ladies are wondering, but if we can have them scored based on the alternative.
No, I think
Model.
that's what, and that's what I'm asking. Do we have the authority to do that?
Oh, okay.
yeah.
even
So
though they're
Member
not
Broussard and
technically an alternative school.
Member Kay, it's a good question. I guess maybe it's also moot in that we don't have an alternative model for the 17-18 school
Right.
year. And we're hoping that the board will approve one for the 18-19 school year. And that work is, and ATAC and AD is directing it. So I think maybe the end result would probably end up being the same, because my understanding anyway is that the board is not going to retroactively assign letter grades to the previous
That's what
2
this
years.
would be.
So the end result might end up being the same, whether it's not, I mean, there's no public file of all the alternative schools that we haven't issued letter grades to
Okay.
listed as NR. The end result would essentially be the same, but if
Yes.
the committee wants to
Okay.
rephrase it in a way that gets us to the means a different way, like issuing them an NR.
I think we were all at different stages of that thought process, actually.
But I think for being consistent with yesterday's, technically they are not an alternative school. They're not designated, so maybe we should be issuing an NR, and then they can go through the process on a go forward.
So I withdraw my motion and
Sorry.
Do you want to make a motion then?
Okay, I will make the motion. Why have I forgotten the school? I move to recommend approval
Sweetwater.
for Sweetwater Community School to receive a letter grade of NR, or no letter grade.
I second.
Motion by Member Kane, a second by Member Broussard to recommend issuing an NR for Sweetwater Community School. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. And the motion passes. Okay, members, last but not least is the Grande Innovation Academy. The Grande Innovation Academy essentially cites one specific instance, and it was an unprofessional teacher who was engaging, and I think we could, without going through the whole board process, could probably be categorized as immoral and unprofessional conduct.
So I am pulling up the packet, but if I recall correctly, we didn't have evidence of any sort of, there wasn't
it's not in our scope.
documentation of
Not in our scope.
any sort of report.
Yeah, there's no disciplinary reports cited or police reports cited or letters from parents or students. It is alarming, absolutely.
Extremely.
Members, correct. All we have is the couple bullet points that a plan of improvement was made. The teacher meeting to discuss the concerns and supervision. No indication in the appeal if this conduct was reported to the investigative unit.
Correct.
But to show that 23% of our students actually decreased in either ELA, math, or both. It's not even that they didn't make progress, they actually decreased. Oh yeah, there is a little bit here about teacher meeting to discuss concerns. Sorry, I missed that page.
It's just
I
very
guess my
limited
thought-
from my perspective.
It's what?
It's very limited from my perspective, and this is something that I would think would have been reported to the investigative unit.
Yeah.
It may be.
And just to throw out a caveat, members, the Grande Innovation Academy, I think, is a charter school. And so it's possible that this individual was not certified, in which case there would be no requirement to report to the investigative unit.
Okay. I as difficult as it is, I don't see unprofessional teacher conduct within the scope of how, the grounds for appealing a letter grade that were set forth.
Adverse environment, I would think. So I'm not comfortable.
So I had a lot of questions still, like how long did this go on? When was this reported? Why were students subjected to this teacher throughout the year? So,
This is crazy, though. 100% supervision by 2 administrators alternating days. We put the academic coach in 2 days per week and the achievement coach in the other 2 days. So once they were made aware, it looks like they went through some extreme lengths.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish they had a little more documentation.
yes. And I know that there are different systems. You did cite a charter system, and I'm limited to the couple of lines that are on this application, but for me, this would have been grounds for termination. So I would not have subjected those students to this based on what they've described: emotional abuse, fear and intimidation, verbal abuse. I would not have done that. So that's where I'm struggling because, yes, there's a drop, but how long was this individual allowed to remain in the classroom?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So when you talk about the steps that the school took, they did take steps to remediate the behavior by the teacher and provide additional supervision, but I think they could have taken additional steps that would have been much stronger and more positive for the students. And again, I'm only going based on the limited information here. So based on that, I am not comfortable approving their appeal. So I would recommend denying the appeal for the Grande Innovation Academy.
I'll second.
It's a motion from Member Kay and a second from Member Burton to recommend denying the Grande Innovation Academy's appeal. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
And the motion passes 2-1.
That's a tough one.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, members, that wraps up the expedited appeals for this agenda item. What we have next are those appeals that board staff feels are not within the scope of the committee.
Okay.
Whoops, logged me out. So those are the schools listed here, these 29 schools. By and large, these 29 schools cited incorrect data as the reason for their appeal, and ADE took a look and determined that incorrect data, assuming best case scenario, if it was included, would not impact the school's letter grade. And so that's why it is put in this bucket. If, for those who may be watching or for committee members who may be wondering, we've done dismissals up to this point for that same reason. But some of those determinations were made either because schools submitted a non-expedited appeal, we wanted to hear from them and provide them with their time, or because it just took ADE a little bit more time to figure it out.
Okay.
Or, sometimes there are other factors. So I think what we might recommend doing is, if the committee members want to sort of peruse the list, and if there's any questions, and I'm going to do the same here, if there's any questions or if you want to pull one to discuss it to make sure, then we can do that. Otherwise, I think it might be appropriate to do a sort of blanket motion after we sort of take a look.
I really wish those were alphabetical. You're not talking into your microphone.
I like to go over Desert Shadows and Summit School.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Desert Shadows and what?
Summit School.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, Member Burton, is there something specifically about Desert Shadows that you want to
Just
discuss?
a minute. Let me just pull out my...
Oh, I think that this may have a similarity with Desert Moon
Valley.
High School, where if they're taking in a Zella, they're still they're still included as an EL
Yes,
student,
exactly.
whether or not they're receiving the services or not. Am I correct in that one?
Yes, that's exactly my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Member Broussard, I think that's a good summation of their appeal. Yeah, and I think the reason that staff recommend putting it into this bucket is that we felt that the appeal is disagreeing with who should be included in the ELL calculation. And ADE, verified that the students who should have been included in that calculation per the business rules were included in that calculation. And so we felt that it was disagreeing with
the business
rules and not how that calculation came about.
Okay. And
then Summit School, I actually had a question on that one as well. And it was it's a little confused. So we have all these students attending the school, but the school is saying, no, we're not a school, we're just a program. Okay, so
and what is it?
So if it's listed as a school, it needs to receive a letter grade, and so that's why it would be a dismissal. But then maybe they need to look into doing a reclassification of whatever their program versus school is. So not something we need to solve today.
Right. Do you know if they're working with the department on that?
Member Burton, it's a good question, and I don't know actually. And it's something that we did circle up with ADE on, I think, in the past week or so, because this was something else that was interesting to us. I don't know if they are, but I think to Member Broussard's point, I mean, that's kind of exactly it. They have an entity ID number. They're identified as a school, and my understanding is that they receive funding like a school. So, those factors in place.
They receive funding like a school.
Yeah, that's
the key there. Yeah. Okay. Then.
And I'm sorry, remember, and one other item that is in addition to that, they receive funding like a school, and connected to that is those students are enrolled at Summit School. And so
that's where they're counted.
If my understanding is if they want to operate it as a district program, those students would be enrolled at other schools within that district, and then they would
be sent
they
over,
would go
to,
over
that
to that program.
Yeah. So I think without any other discussion on any other, and how would you like us to? Because if you'd like me to just do it in one motion.
Yeah. Member Broussard, I think that would be appropriate if there could just be a sort of this. Oh, and then I'm sorry, there was that late appeal. So we did receive an appeal that was late, that we received at about 10:30 or so. That was about 5.5 hours after the close of the window. And so originally we weren't going to include that as part of this committee's determination, but we wanted to kind of close the loop on it. So the
I was wondering because I saw their name on our spreadsheet without any additional info.
That school would not, their letter grade would not be impacted. Is that correct?
Member Burton, I don't know because it was submitted after the window, and actually I think their letter grade is publicly posted right now because it was not included in the list of schools.
Okay, you just put it up there, just FYI.
Yeah, we just wanted to close the loop on it.
So would you like me to, I move to recommend the A through F Appeals Committee, that one there?
Yep.
Okay. Determine the appeals listed in numbers 1 through 29 and including Ignacio Concha School and the late, okay.
For dismissal.
Yeah, are dismissed based on business rule and other. Is that what, did I encompass everything? I know I said it very disjointedly, but does everybody understand what I was saying there?
Member Broussard,
Dismiss the appeals.
I think that was clear. I think, especially with the conversation leading up to that, I think it's good. We're going to dismiss those 29 appeals listed and the late school for the reasons that they're outside the scope and what have you. So that's good.
I will second that.
That's a motion by Member Broussard and a second by Member Burton. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Do have it so ordered. So, members, that concludes our agenda for today. And actually, I was going to make you stick around while I did a super final check to make sure that my spreadsheet is complete. But other than that, I think we are about done. Are there any questions on next steps? What staff is going to do is going to compile this. Will go as board items, agenda items for the board on December 17th. We'll compile it. We'll try to do it in one agenda item.
And then I think we have 3 that we tabled.
Yes, we do have at least 3 that we tabled, and we'll try to schedule a follow-up meeting. Tentatively, maybe we'll try to do the morning of the 17th, so that way we don't have to make another trip here, and especially, hopefully we can get through those prior to the board meeting. So we might try it for like 8 or 8:30. But are there any other questions or concerns? So with that, thank you so much for all your work and all the reviewing. I know it was a lot, so I appreciate it.
Do we need to have a motion to adjourn?
No
Good.
motion to adjourn.
Well, it doesn't matter. Just in case, I'm covering our bases. I move that we adjourn.
Catcher, thank you for your work on this.
You too,
You did
Melissa.
a great
Thank
job,
you.
both of you.
Did you hear me? Okay. We know you're there.